Welcome to this Cyberstorm in a nutshell. Today we're talking about startups. With me today is Jonas Wagner from Threatray and Jean-Philippe Aumasson from Taurus. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Jean-Philippe, you're a scientist, a cryptographer. You've worked for Krelski many years. You had one of these rare scientific positions in the industry, I presume certain salary, and you gave this up to work in a startup, to found a startup. And on top, you continue to publish books. And you're a family man on top. The latest book you published was with your daughter. You look very healthy. You're back from holidays. You still have holidays. How do you do this? What is your secret to all this life?
Well, thank you, Christian, for this introduction. I don't know if I deserve so many good words. But regarding the first point you mentioned, I've been working almost 10 years for the Krelski Group. I've been lucky to work in different roles, doing very technical stuff, and learning a lot, doing consulting, working with software and hardware. And at some point, like many people, you feel like, okay, I've worked in a big company, maybe it's time, I'm at this stage in my career, when is the best time if I want to do my own projects, my own startups. So that's what I decided. So I left Krelski in very good terms. It's a very good company, and I started these new adventures. But yet time management, as many startup founders know, it tends to be the most challenging part.
The most challenging part of it. Okay. And you started in 2018, I think, and Threatray also started in 2018.
Exactly.
You have a bit of a different background, Jonas. You did your studies, and out of your studies, you started Threatray.
Exactly.
Is that how you're getting it?
So let's say the core part of what we do was actually part of my master's thesis. So we had this university lab at the University of Applied Sciences in Bern, and we developed algorithms around analyzing malware threats, and out of that came basically the fundamental algorithms that we now then transformed into the product at Threatray.
Okay, so this is what you're doing. You researched something which you thought interesting, it kind of worked, and then you guys decided, hey, let's build a company around this idea because apparently there is something to it.
Exactly.
So you mentioned malware analysis. So what is it that you do?
So from a technical background, what we tried to do initially is to have a new way of identifying malware threats. So instead of looking at high-level patterns, as it often is, we try to go deeper and try to identify code fragments of malware, because malware is just like software, right?
Yeah. So we're looking at code. Threats are already code and software.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we try to identify and re-identify similar types of threats to connect them with each other, which then allows you to very accurately identify certain threats. So not just say bad or good, but is it type A or type B or type C? And then out of this idea basically came the product, because we're very good at identifying that, and that's a use case everyone likes to have on one hand, and on the other hand we also make these threats searchable, just like a search engine, right? So you can go through millions of threats in seconds and say, well, have I seen this before, right? Have I been affected in the past by this? And out of that then basically came this product, right?
Okay, so you're getting like a lot of malware samples, and then you try to group them with algorithms. That sounds a lot like machine learning.
Yeah, we use some machine learning in between, and we make it searchable. And by making them searchable, we basically lift the capabilities of identifying and correlating attacks to a new depth that is not easily doable or easily accessible for
so that's a new thing.
Yeah.
That's a new thing that you're doing there. Okay. Talking about new, you're a blockchain startup in the widest sense.
No, Christian, we're not a blockchain startup.
But you're working in cryptographic assets.
Yes, it's related to the blockchain space.
Blockchain space, that sounds good.
But you're right, many people are confused when they go to our website. They're like, what do you do? Do you do hardware, software?
I can confirm that, yeah.
So ultimately, we talk not purely of blockchain, but of digital assets. Because today, there's a big evolution whereby not only individuals, but also institutions and financial actors, and even financial regulators like FINMA in Switzerland, are moving into this space. So what we do, so we enable financial institutions, so mainly banks, to work to manage digital assets. So when we say digital assets, it can be cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, the one that everybody knows, but also digital currencies such as DM, or if we have one day a digital Swiss franc. And it's also, and that's maybe what's the newest, tokenized securities. So financial instruments that live in the classical finance world, but that can be represented as digital tokens on a blockchain or more generally on a digital ledger. So if you read the new law that was passed a few months ago in the Swiss Parliament, it allows, in the context of the Swiss law, to work with tokenized securities, but the word blockchain is not even mentioned, so they talk of electronic ledger. So going back to what we do, so we are a fintech financial technology company, we are a technological company, and we do the technology that banks can integrate or work with in a SaaS mode to manage, to store safely their securities. So storing is not like gold. The more you have, the more stuff you need to put in a room. It's just digital. So it's just one cryptographic key or a few cryptographic keys that you have to protect. And if these keys are stolen, then you lose the money. So that's the biggest challenge.
That's the biggest challenge. This is where you come in.
Yes,
because you bring that cryptographic knowledge to banks that don't have it.
Exactly. So it's like a security puzzle, security engineering. But maybe the most challenging part, at least from my perspective, because my background is in security, cryptography. I've been doing this for 10 years. I know this in and out. But what is often quite challenging is to integrate this technology in the bank's ecosystem, in the bank's IT, and to connect all the pipes to make sure that your product doesn't jeopardize the security posture, the compliance posture of the bank, because Swiss banks have very, as you may know, very strict procedures, processes.
Okay, of course. So compliance is a big challenge for you as well, and your customers risk a compliance problem unless you do your job properly.
Right, and we're very serious because we are regulated ourselves. We have a FINMA license, a security house license.
Yeah, that was the first time you really hit the news. When I saw you hitting the news, was you obtained the license.
Yeah, so we're in this funny situation where we are, on the one hand, a startup, young, a bit chaotic, but we cannot be so chaotic because we are working with banks, and we are also very strict in terms of procedures. So as Chief Security Officer, I'm responsible of making sure that we follow all the processes in terms of, for example, vulnerability management, working with malware detection, for example, change management, incident response. We are audited regularly by top firms, so we are very, very serious about it because we know that if we fail in terms of compliance, then it's bad for us, it's bad for the clients.
Okay, I see that. So that is a very different outset for you because you have the freedom to develop something new and market to a few
market
analysts,
right?
A few labs, while you guys need to talk to top management.
Yeah, it's maybe a different business model, I think. From what I understand, so what you guys are doing is, I don't know if it can be called deep tech, but you're really innovating at the core of the malware detection engine. What our work encompasses also the architecture.
I mean, we have to integrate to a degree as well, because in most teams you already have different tools, right? You collect logs, you collect binaries, you collect all different kind of things, and all of those technologies try to talk to each other, ideally. And then there's some technologies in between that try to make talking much easier. And now comes our new technology, and you need to tell people, well, where does this fit, right? What does it connect to? What's the input? What's the output? Right? And we also have to gain that understanding of where do we fit in
how to integrate, how connect to CMs and so on.
But the problem you're addressing, how to integrate and fit together, I mean, that is a global market, a global community, and everybody uses the same tools, I presume.
More or less, yeah.
More or less. Whereas you have now a Swiss license, and I take it the regulation is different in every country. So if you have to be so close to the regulation, it's challenging to go to a bigger market.
So on the one hand, so there's the Swiss security license regarding the exchange that we are operating. I did not mention it, but we run this exchange on TDX.
So you're a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to digital ledgers.
Well, we try to. I will not I don't like to use the word holistic, but we try to provide
But
all
it's
the
used on the
necessary
website.
tools.
Holistic is
Maybe
used.
it is, but we, as a client, as a bank, you don't want to talk to 10 different parties with 10
Yeah.
different
So you
systems.
bring anything digital ledgers to a mid-sized bank who doesn't have the know-how and doesn't have the capacity.
Right, so for example, very simply, we have both technology to store the assets, also to integrate them in your core banking, and also to issue your own token. So if you want
Yeah.
to create the Swiss Cyberstorm coin tomorrow,
Oh
you
yeah,
can.
let's note.
And also security, so is an important aspect, software security. We need to be able to demonstrate that our IT environment is safe, that we have logs of everything we do, and that we, for example, we're immune to all sorts of malware. So I'm very interested about what Jonas has to say.
Great.
Cool. But then you're ultimately targeting a bigger market than Switzerland.
I mean, we are global. We have clients in Europe. We have clients in the US as well.
And then with Swiss banking know-how, you're ready for the US market.
Yeah, well,
kind of that.
Yeah, we started locally because we're also lucky to have in Switzerland a very mature ecosystem and financial actors that have been willing to approach this world of digital assets, and also very pragmatic regulator. I think FINMA has been doing very, very good work in issuing new regulations.
Okay, so yeah, I mean there is the point with we could destroy this new market with bad regulation. So it's how open do you leave it, how much do we regulate it, and you think Switzerland's done a good job there?
Yeah, I think because some people would ask you, oh, do you believe in Bitcoin and blockchain? The question is not your personal opinion regarding whether you think it will be good or not, whether it will stay. We have to realize the reality is that it's out there. There's tons of money, billions and trillions of money invested. There are opportunities, so regardless of whether or not you like it or believe in it, from business perspective,
there is business to be made.
Yeah.
I think I got that as much as that. What you said, Jonas, is you're doing something new. So that looks like, I was surprised this is new, by the way, but the way you explained it to us, this is new technology. So you're bringing something new to the market, and I guess the competition is far different from what I understand is digital ledger startups. That's a Shark Tank.
Yeah. Well, we do just B2B, so I don't know if you guys do B2B, B2C, or
B2B
cloud-based, or...
Yeah. But there's so many of these startups in this domain. I mean, the competition is huge, while as your competition, it's probably tough, or selling is always difficult.
Yeah.
But it's not like 100 companies who try to do the same thing that you do.
Well, I would say the opposite actually, because even this morning I was looking at the situation with malware detection, endpoint security for different platforms, and there are tons of vendors. Are the old ones trying to catch up. They are the new entrants. But in our space, there are very few companies doing the kind of thing what we do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So for an outsider like me, it looks like it's the same. That stuff.
No, there are tons of companies doing blockchain things, but companies doing banking grade digital asset management, issuance, and storage, using things that banks can accept. There's maybe 2 or 3 players in Switzerland and very few in Europe.
So you would say between a bank and a blockchain startup, there's a huge gap, and you fit in there. Yeah.
Yes, because a bank that is regulated and that has a lot of constraints regarding, for example, protection of clients' personal data, regarding loss of funds, it's a completely different game than even small investment funds or individuals or small organizations that just want to make money quickly. It's a completely different game.
Okay.
And I think the sales cycles, I don't know in you guys' case, but if you work with a bank, you really have to get their trust, because you will be in contact with their funds directly, potentially with their client identifiers. So it can be very sensitive, and therefore it can take a lot of time to go through all the due diligence and evaluation processes.
Until you have a partnership established.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, if you run an antivirus, if you do malware detection, you might have to work with the kernel, you might have to be very low in the in the system. So I have a friend who is doing something a bit similar to what you're doing, and they had to demonstrate that their kernel model was not backdoor. They had to do a number of security audits to demonstrate that it was safe. So when you're a new startup, and also when you approach big companies, the big companies, they will tell you, okay, you're a small startup, you're a very friendly guys, you do good tech, but do we know that in 2 years from now you will still be around?
Yeah, you have
and you
to.
have this catch-22 at the beginning, or you have to, you know.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. You're not brand new startups. You started like 3 years ago. Both of you are still doing fine. You get investments. The way I looked at Threatray, this is a classic Swiss startup story, guys. It's a spin-off from University of Applied Sciences. You teamed with Andre Bangerter.
Right.
You're a professor,
Yes.
and you launched a startup. You got some investments. Would you say this is classical best practice, or this is how it works in Switzerland?
That's hard to say or generalize. For us, it worked well. We've heard of similar cases before of startups who basically incepted out of research work and then saw an opportunity. So it worked out well for us in this case.
So far?
So far. Yeah, so far that worked out well. Yeah.
Okay. And you have the university background, and then you need the business know-how as well.
Yeah.
And this is in your situation where the investors come in, so they're not only giving you a big check, they're also giving you knowledge, tips, so you don't have to fall into the traps.
Yeah, so we're both techies, right? We
Yeah.
come from the techie world. We know the.
So you two guys run the company basically.
Yeah, we run the company, and the idea of investors was not just money, that's important as well, but also experience from this entire startup process. So we have very little knowledge of business, of how do we hire the right people, what are all the legal aspects that we need to consider, how to get from technology to a product to the market. And a lot of those angel investors became part of our advisory board, and we basically built that advisory board purely for the reason to support us and extend our knowledge of this entire process and of the entire aspects of building a company from basically just the technology.
Yeah.
And that was tremendously helpful to have a lot of insights and past learnings being transported to us.
Okay, and for the investor, it becomes interesting because they can control what is happening to the money. The closer they are to you.
It's. I also have the feeling they enjoy that. They want to be part of the process. They want to share their knowledge.
So that's the serial investor who has fun working with startups.
Yeah. They've seen startups before, and they say, well, here I can help.
Okay.
Right? Not just with money, but I've seen this situation. How about you do it like this? Because of my experience, I can tell you this works out best. Right?
Okay, so in your case, that is Ariel Lüdi from the Hammer team,
For example,
Thomas Dübendorfer, well-known Swiss angel investors.
Yeah. So they have a lot of experience in supporting the build-up of startups. They also had their own startups. So that's extremely helpful to have these insights and these learning from people who have been in this industry for a long time.
Yeah.
To basically profit from them. And,
okay.
And ultimately, you need to learn so many things very quickly, and at least have a basic understanding of many different things besides technology, and that really accelerates this kind of learning process.
Yeah, I get that. So, so there was a professor and a student. In your situation, that was really different because you guys did not go to school together.
No, really. By the way, the names I hear from your board, I think you're in good hands. And one of the person you mentioned, I had a discussion with him, and I guess he will help you on this side. It may be a stereotype, but startups in Switzerland, we tend to have very skilled, very good technology, very knowledgeable people, very smart people, very trustworthy people. But unlike Americans, we have a different approach to selling, to approaching the market.
Yeah.
We're not too much into the fake it until you make it. It's like make it and then try to
find a market. By the way, we have a product.
Yeah, and I think as young founders and as people with technical background like I have, we may be a bit naive or inexperienced, but sometimes what I've learned through my few years of startup is that we should not hesitate into not exaggerating, but being proud of what we do.
Okay.
And being bold and telling confidently clients what our stuff is doing. Because you maybe you come from school, you have a scientific background, so the first thing you will say is that we're doing this, but we're not doing that. There is this risk, there's limitations, and sometimes it scares clients. So
okay. And does that make you uneasy? to be bold and go out and say, we've solved this?
Yeah, initially, because you tend, you like to, well, you want to preserve your integrity,
Yes.
your intellectual honesty, your reputation.
Well, you're a scientist. You publish books and you make sure there are no mistakes in the book.
Yeah, I don't know if I can be called a scientist today, but I stick to this, scientific approach. And going to the market, selling stuff, and doing business generally is a completely different game.
Yeah.
And intellectually, in terms of integrity of communication, is a completely different game you have to play.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest challenge for me when
For you really?
Yes,
Yeah.
and even now. So, but I'm lucky. Maybe it's the good transition with your question.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned we are 4 co-founders, and Taurus would never be here if I was the only one on board.
Okay.
I think the key people driving the company, it was Sebastian Decimo and Amin Brahimi, who have background. So they have an engineer training. So they did the PFL. So they have both the technical understanding. And then they have the experience of working with big consulting firms and with financial organizations, private banks, hedge funds.
Yeah. So they know the language of
They know the
customers.
language,
Yeah.
they have the network, and I've been learning a lot, in terms of how banks work, how finance is working. And that's maybe our strength, the fact that we're complementary. We also have the 4th co-founder who has a law background. He's a lawyer, he worked with FINMA before.
Yeah.
And when you approach client, then you can talk the same language regarding whether you talk about legal aspects, you talk about financials, you talk about security, cryptography, and then it's easier to gain the trust of the client, because ultimately it's also a cliche, but investors, client, they bet on people, because
They bet on people,
the product will change, the world will change, but the people will stay the same.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
To a certain degree. No, I mean, in the end, they buy you and your idea and your passion, and they trust that you do a good product.
Right, and they trust you in being true to yourself, because they know you have skin in the game.
Yes.
So it's in your interest to make the clients happy.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because it was funny when we pitched to the first couple of investors. We asked them, so what do you look for? And they said the team.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they understand the technology, sometimes not. But it's fine. They trust the team. They trust other people who invest in the same team.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this network effect. But ultimately, it's exactly what you say.
Yeah.
Right? It's the team.
Yeah, much of Andre Bangerter, has very good reputation.
Yeah.
I know him. He's one of the people in security I respect the most in the country. So not the only one.
Yeah. So and you talked about this network effect. So when the first investor signs up, then the other investors get the signal. Okay, we can make the step as well. Does that work out with your
I think there's
situation as well?
Sometimes this aspect, investors want to feel they're not the only one to believe in the company. Yeah. But sometimes, from my experience, it can be the opposite. They want to be the first to have the best relationship and to be maybe the lead investors.
To you,
yeah.
Okay.
And maybe to influence you. I don't know. In our case, in the case of Taurus, so we did not start by working with VCs, by seeking VC investment. We had quite a different approach.
Oh, okay.
We did the first round, family and friends. We did a Series A last year where we onboarded some new investors, including big blockchain foundations, including banks. But we don't have pure VC funds as our investors. It might change in the next round, but currently we have, let's say, full control of the company. The founders still have majority equity in the company. But it's also due to the nature of the company. I'm not saying that VCs are good or bad.
Yeah,
it depends on your approach.
You took it, yeah.
And as Jonas mentioned, they can be very helpful, helping you, first of all, build a network, and also, how to approach the market, because VCs tend to have a good network also of other companies in the portfolio. So they will help you find synergies, and they know the mistakes not to make.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the same. So it is not only money that you're getting, but it's a network of knowledge that you can then use. Yeah. And otherwise you would have to buy this knowledge, and that would be much more difficult. Yeah, I get that. Okay. When we look at the 2 companies, you're still the 2 techies running that. And the investor you've mentioned, they're fairly close to you. So they're on the day-to-day management, they play a role as well. Well, in your case, you're a more classical firm that you have founders, they're the executive board.
So we have a board, a company, we have an executive committee. So we have a structure that kind of resembles that of a bank because to be compliant
With the bank, it helps to have the same structure.
we need to have this, let's say, accountability, this specific role. So who's responsible for oversight, who's responsible for operations, and so on. So we are very structured for these reasons.
Okay. Well, you're more flexible because you don't have to be so clear.
Right. The management is essentially the two founders that we have, and then we have this advisory board that is more on a pull basis, right? If we need to know something, we go.
Okay.
And
You
obviously we have,
and they'll pick up the phone.
yeah, exactly. And they do pick up the phone.
That's good.
Every time.
Good to know.
And we have the board, which also includes part of the investors, and they obviously have a lot of knowledge in how to structure board, how to, on a high level, manage a company as well, right? But ultimately, it's still Endre and my decision to lead the company where we think it needs to go.
Okay, interesting. And you're like 8 to 10 people now.
Exactly.
You told me. Okay. So what is your size now? Because you have the same age as the company.
Yeah, we're close to 40, and it's mostly engineers, and with the HQ in Geneva, another office in Lausanne, where most of the engineers are.
And you're at the stage now where you launched your product, your services, you're accepting customers. The first step is done.
Yeah, we have clients. We've been lucky initially because, to make a long story short, the first product, we have our flagship product called Taurus Protect, which is the technology to store and manage credentials. So the premise of the company was to found an exchange platform. So to have an exchange, we needed this kind of storage management solution. We looked in the market, and we did not find anything satisfactory. So we ended up building our own solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
It gets interesting.
And the story is that we, spring 2018, we had a meeting with a bank, and they were telling us they were also looking for this kind of solution. And we told them, oh, by the way, we're building our own. We're considering, offering into the market. And they said, okay, so join our RFP. You're like, okay, we're not sure.
That is not the idea of the company, but
yeah, but then there were maybe 12 entrants in the RFP, and we ended up winning the RFP, and now we are working with this big private bank. So sometimes, you have a plan initially in a startup. It's good to have a plan. You need to have a plan for 3 years, but ultimately things
the
go
market
completely
could be
differently.
Different. I think that is typical of a startup, isn't it? That as you approach the market, you learn, and actually that side product is much more interesting.
Yes, and it's based ultimately in our position. We are really driven by the demand of the clients and their needs. So we try to listen to them, because maybe we might believe as an engineer, engineers say, oh, this is exciting, implement this new feature, this new blockchain is so cool, they have zero knowledge proof,
Yeah, tell me all about it, yeah.
But then the clients will say, well, from our perspective, from the business perspective, we want to support this platform that you may not like, and everybody has a different perspective, so you need to consider all aspects, both on the short term and long term.
Because that, again, has an effect on the company and your long-term plan.
Yes, because also, clients might say, we want this now in 2 months. Yeah. But you have to consider that there is this new technology being developed that will be mature maybe in 1 or 2 years. Yeah. And then clients, they don't know it, they don't understand it, but in 2 years.
And if you're always running after 2-month projects, you'll never be there.
Right, and you will lag behind because a new startup will be there. So it's very, you need to do all the tactical stuff and all the strategical stuff as well.
Okay.
That's very nicely said, because we also run into this several times. On one hand, you have this internal drive to create something cool out of this technology, but you still need to kind of manage it towards the market and target it towards the market. And then the market is, I would say, more short-term in a sense of I want this, I want this, I want this. But on the other hand, you still have to have your internal strategy for the next year, for the next 2 years. And as you said beforehand, sometimes you see things that the market might not see or not yet see, and maybe only certain parts of the market see that. And you also need to have a little bit of a belief that what you're building could be valuable in 1 year or 2 years. Maybe not now, but in a year.
The market might not be ripe so far.
Yeah, exactly.
And the challenge for you is that the security market, and especially like the cybersecurity detection market, it's often driven by hype. And the problem is that clients, they rarely have a way to benchmark, to evaluate the efficiency of a product. So if you look at the big names, they have tons of marketing, they do this and that. Maybe they have good products, I don't know. But as a client, you have very few ways to measure, how effective is it. Like you buy a new car, you drive the car, you can try it. But malware detection is very hard because you can detect everything. It's easy to detect everything. You block everything. The hard problem is to know, how to manage false positive, false negative, how to manage risk, how to integrate it in the platform, how to manage performance overhead.
And the customer will not know this until he has used it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that is also a problem where I work. Okay. Okay, guys, and next question. Looking at your 2 websites, when I did my research, one thing that struck me is there is a total absence of women in this game. This tells me, or might tell me 2 things. A, startup world is a man's world, or B, you don't need women because you have enough good men around. Who wants to pick up?
So hiring, that's a very important point in the company because, as you mentioned, hiring, it's also, you cannot afford casting errors. People is very important. So we are very diligent in our hiring process, how we talk to people, how we carry out interviews. The time we spend talking to people, listening to people. And regarding diversity, that's a conversation we often have because we want to be open, we want to, more generally in terms of company culture, to be open to your different opinions, different types of people. And regarding women specifically, so it's not surprised that when you put an open position for, an engineer, a developer, you receive 50 applications.
You
and
do?
If you receive 50 applications, you will likely receive 45 men.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
And then you do the interviews and you hire the people that fit the best and you're open to any profile. And as a matter of fact, so we have two women in the companies and one who is engineer. And that's how it is. The market, it's such that you put a job application, a job opening.
Yeah, but it's not only a matter of recruiting, it's also who is founding security startups in Switzerland. And apparently you guys are all males, the founders. And in your case, it's all males as well.
Yeah.
So there seems to be, founding a security startup doesn't seem to be very interesting or less interesting for women, and apparently the pool is smaller.
I think it's evolving. I see more and more women entering this game. So of course, when you're a minority entering a world, then you have all the problems of being a minority.
Yeah.
But I think it should not be about finger pointing, but just being open, and maybe stating maybe on your website that okay, you're open to every application. You encourage this. Some companies have kind of affirmative action or positive discrimination. Some people choose not to do this. I don't think there's any good or bad. It depends on your ecosystem. But ultimately, what matters a lot, it's the company culture, because many companies, they do greenwashing, they do pro-diversity on the website, but it's completely hypercritical because internally they don't have a good company culture. So what we really enforce in the company is a culture of respect of opinions, avoiding politics, and when someone is, let's say, not in line with this, we respectfully tell the person, okay, this was not okay, please be careful next time.
Okay.
But,
okay, and as you're apparently smaller, is that a problem you already have, or that you're looking at, or this is something for next year when you're approaching the 100 employees?
Yeah, so obviously we also want to have an inclusive culture, and we have cultural values that we hire for ultimately, and if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out, but I think it's a very important point, as you mentioned beforehand, that to have this proper process of hiring and selecting, because if you're so small, you cannot really make a lot of mistakes, otherwise you end up in the ditch. And so the hiring process really has to be focused on avoiding mistakes very early on. And we try to optimize for that. And again, it's good to have people who have done this and created this process before. And I think we also want to drive a culture. It's not as specced out as you mentioned it before. We're not there yet, but that will come as well with growth.
Okay. Jean-Philippe, you said when you have an engineering position open, you get 40 applications?
Well, I just made up this number, but we get an overwhelming majority of men.
Yeah, but you get a lot of applications when you have a job offering.
We tend to receive a lot of
That
applications.
is great, because what I hear for other company is they're
Well, I said
scratching
applications. I did not say good applications.
Yeah, sure, but only the best people are working for you, I presume. So you weed out all the bad ones and you identify them quickly, but still, at least you can choose.
Yeah, we do our best, but for certain roles, it's relatively easy.
Okay.
For other roles, it's much harder. What has worked well is leveraging your network, because people join a company. When you join a company, well, there's of course a salary, the job.
Yeah.
But for many people, it's, well, you join not a new family, but you join a new world,
Yeah.
and you join people.
You join people,
join
and if
project,
your
you join
friends
an
are
ID.
already there, then that helps.
Your friend, and it's important, like the impression you make on the person you talk to.
Yeah.
If you are rude, if you're not respectful,
Yeah,
if
sure. Yeah.
you know, people, they will forget the words, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
So you want to be very welcoming to people, and you know, people talk always when you do an interview. The people you interview, even if you don't accept them, they will talk about you with their friends, with their colleagues, and word spread. So we try to be very, very careful to this, and to respect the time of the people we interview, both in a positive and negative way. So we don't want to waste their time, but we value their time, and we take time to answer everybody's questions.
Yes, I guess that's, you said this before, you're not allowed to make a lot of mistakes, because if you're hiring, let's say, a bad apple in a small company, that drags you down, really, and
for us it would be a tenth of the company.
A tenth of the company, and 5 people are affected, and then you have quarrels.
Exactly. If you have 500 people and 1 or 2 people are bad apples, it doesn't fall so much into the weight. But with 10 people,
I think we're lucky in Switzerland in the management, the work environment, we tend to have a culture of respect, of listening to others, and good. And then if you work with many remote people, you might have, and especially if you work remotely, you don't have people face to face, and the language barrier, the cultural difference, you have to be careful to avoid misunderstandings.
Absolutely. And that naturally creeps in.
Especially when you work with engineers who tend to have limited social skills.
Yeah, get this. So recruiting is still possible in Switzerland. So basically, you find people, it depends on the position, but it's not like the big corps have eaten up the market and everybody wants to work in Zurich.
No, not necessarily.
Well, big
you have, of course, the big companies that we know in Zurich. But sometimes it's the other way. For example, we hired some people who left Google for a variety of reasons. But I believe in Switzerland we have some good companies. We have some good, let's say, good schools. And the challenge, of course, from the school's perspective, is to provide a training that kind of matches the IT technology evolution, that matches the needs of the market. And it's really hard because, 2 or 3 years from now, all the cloud-based systems, things like Kubernetes, it was not same in terms of low-level processors. Now ARM is much more, let's say, relevant than it used to be 10 years ago.
Okay.
So also schools need to adapt.
And you see that doing that, or is that a topic where you study BFH? Like, let's produce graduates that fit the market, like train for future jobs.
Yeah, the education I had at the University of Applied Sciences was truly applied. So we learned a lot of concepts.
So you're close to the industry. At
that you can actually apply in the industry. It's a bit less theoretical and a bit more practical. Let's say programming courses, or a lot of the malware courses and cybersecurity courses that we have are actually a good amount of knowledge for a foundation on top that you can grow, right?
And that's something. That's point I agree with. We have this, in the Fachschulen, you have people who do very applied stuff, tend to work with industry a lot. So they get students very close to the market doing actual things. And then we have EPFL, ETH, that tend to be more fundamental. But generally, both places, they tend to do their best to be close to industry, to the real world, so to speak. which is not the case in every country.
Okay, so that is something that works in Switzerland, you think?
Well, as a French person, as a French citizen, I appreciate this.
In Switzerland, okay, yeah, I was going a bit in that direction. That's interesting to learn. There is a map of security startups published by Dreamlab Technologies, and it's a huge map. It's a surprisingly big map, just how many security startups there exist in Switzerland. I don't know if you're familiar with all the names. I don't understand what most of them do. Many of them I've never heard the name, but apparently they exist. Why do we have so many security startups in Switzerland? Is that a Swiss thing about security? We tend to think it's a Swiss thing. Is that true, or would Austria or Italy have the same or larger amount of security startups? Do you even know? I
think that there are multiple factors into play, like with everything, but the ones I've observed, so there's of course, like you mentioned, the tradition of Switzerland in terms of security, privacy, and some countries trusting Swiss laws, Swiss technology, and Swiss people. There is also support from the public sector with initiatives. I mentioned, for example, EPFL, they have the Center for Digital Trust. They had, I forgot the name, Trust, they had different projects, the Trust Valley project,
yes.
Which is also supported by the local politicians, by the Geneva Canton, the Vaud Canton. So there's this push from public sector, and of course another factor is the need or the perceived need, because we have, let's say, much more reliance on IT, and there's all the things we see in the news every other day. There's all the ransomware risks, there's all the hacks in the blockchain DeFi space. So from an emotional perspective, what people gather of this is that, oh, there's a lot of things to fix, there's a lot of things to do. It's not really. And then people try to seize the opportunity. Maybe they have new ideas, maybe they're motivated by making money. There's a lot of reasons. We have many startups now. The question is, what is the return on investment? What will be the success rate?
Well, that we'll see. But you think it's an active scene and people are interested in that?
I think to add to this list is also we have plenty of investors and people
that
are interested.
Now willing and ready to do this.
Not just in security, but in general. If you look at, for example, the Swiss Investor Club that grew immensely over the last couple of years in terms of the members and in terms of the investments and the amount of investments they did. So there's really a good ecosystem in Switzerland since a couple of years now to actually start a company and find funding for a company.
Okay, good. So you guys would generally say it's a good thing to start a startup. Yeah. You would recommend that? Hold on,
it
don't
depends.
do this.
Yeah, it's always a learning experience regardless of the route you follow.
Yeah.
And of course, there are companies that have many different profiles. Every company has their strengths and weaknesses. But from my own perspective, I feel some companies enter the field, and some of them are, let's say, trying to leverage the fact that we are a Swiss company, But to approach the global market, I feel that even though Switzerland is respected, having a Swiss-made label is not sufficient anymore.
Maybe it works in Germany and France, but beyond Switzerland doesn't sell that much.
Yeah,
or
also
it is.
In the countries you mentioned, there are also some companies that are successful because the big companies in these countries and the government, for sovereignty reasons, they have to or they prefer to work with local companies.
Yeah.
So you have companies in Germany or France, they only work with companies from their country that do not want to work with Americans for good or bad reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for watching and listening on Swiss Cyberstorm in a nutshell. This was probably the last edition of this year, and the next real thing we're doing at Swiss Cyberstorm is the Swiss Cyberstorm Conference on October 12th here in Bern. In the Kursaal, this is going to be an on-site conference for good or worse, but we really try to push through, and see you at Swiss Cyberstorm on October 12th. Thank you.